So maybe I'll just start and before I turn the floor over. So I'm Nancy Ford. I'm a professor at Simon Fraser University, which is located in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I am not at a PUI. I have at a full, I guess it's the US term would be R01 university, but I am the chair of the APS Bio Engagement Committee. So on behalf of the committee, I'm here to welcome you all to this event. It's part of a roughly monthly seminar series that we host online. And I'm just going to show you how to learn more. So if you go to the DBio homepage, which you can get simply by Googling APS DBio, and it'll take you here. You can see a lot of links, but if you click on the workshops and networking link, then this takes you to a list of all of our events. So the one next month is about how to get more involved with APS and DBio. The information will be posted shortly once the panelists have been confirmed. And we've organized a number of events leading up to the March meeting, approximately monthly, about different topics that have been suggested to be of interest to DBio members. So check your Engage emails or Twitter or this webpage to get updates on what is planned for the future and join us for anything that's relevant. We also have a list of all of the events we've organized in the past, and all of these have been recorded as today's meeting is. So if there's any of these that interest you, you can click on them and then get a link to the recording and see what you learned about or missed out on at the time. So we hope this is a nice way for the DBio community to stay connected when we're not all at a meeting together. And there's been some really great ideas that have come out of some of these meetings. And this is another one of them that Oren Schindel, who is one of our members of the engagement committee, has been really spearheading, is trying to get people at PUIs more connected to each other. So that does it for my welcome, and I'll turn the floor over to Oren to run the show today.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Okay, so just to welcome everybody. Again, my name is Oren Schindel. I'm at Trinity University, which is a liberal arts college in San Antonio, Texas. And this is the second of community engagement events from DBio that is geared towards faculty at PUIs. And basically the goal of these workshops events has been to try to build connections between us, because in many ways there aren't natural ways for us to interact as PUI faculty, but we do have some things that are all of common concern, which are different from the R1 environment. So that's kind of the idea of these. And on that page that Nancy just showed, our event from last year, Life at a PUI, is available if anybody's curious. So basically today's event is about trying to discuss how we might, for people who are interested, move forward in building a network among ourselves. And we have three panelists, Patricia Soto, who's at Creighton University, Bruce Rodenborn at Center College, and Catherine Crouch at Swarthmore. And basically each panelist is going to give a brief discussion of sort of their view of what a network among PUI faculty might look like, how we might go about building one, or any other comments they'd like to make. And the goal is sort of just to spark conversation, and we can discuss after their comments if anybody wants to chime in or ask questions. We'll go from there. And I think we'll start with Patricia, if that's okay.
Okay, so I hope everybody can see the slides. And I put together 2 slides besides the first one, kind of to guide what I want to share with people. But probably I have to say first what my context is. So my department, physics department, is housed at a university that focuses on pre-meds. So most of our, actually all our service courses are targeted to pre-meds. And in the last, probably the last 5 years, we have had an increase in the number of students in a new track that we call biomedical physics. Because of the nature of the institution, right? There is a lot of bio interest. And our department also offers a master's program. We have a small master's physics program. We graduate about 4 or maximum 5 students. And a colleague of mine put together a master's in medical physics. And that program has been growing. And I think by now they are graduating about 4 students per year. So that's the context of my institution. So what I want to share with you today is why I love the idea of having a network. That's why I wrote the question is not why, but how. And I think the timing is just is very rich for us. I think the community of biological physics gained lots of momentum with the decadal survey that we had last year. So this is a growing community, and that we are a growing community means that there will be more faculty at primarily undergraduate institutions whose scholarship is biological physics. Let's see, this is what I want to say. Probably this makes sense to everybody already, but what are the benefits of having a network of faculty? We want to sustain our scholarship and keep our intellectual vitality that might get hindered when we become associate or full professors. We want to cultivate a community of like-minded people with whom we share values about scholarship and teaching. We want to transfer or model our habits, our professional habits, to our own students. I believe in teaching strongly, and so I think the community enriches our teaching and also supports professional development. So what is the logistics of sustaining a network that fulfills all these 5 requirements? It has to have service from faculty, but what I have learned is that that type of service is not always recognized by the department chair. So that is something like restricts the availability. But I have been a member of other networks, and what I have seen clearly in those other networks is that if there is money, there is credibility, visibility, and institutional support for the network. So that's how things are. Doesn't mean that I agree or that I like, but that's how things are. So when I met Orin about a month ago, we engaged in a conversation about discussing the options of having an NSF RCN grant through another network. I knew about this funding mechanism. The basic idea is that for this type of grant, we have to have a science team. So the grant has to be a science grant, and the grant is gonna involve all these faculty enrichment and intellectual engagement and so on. The way I have seen these grants work, and on the next slide, I'm gonna give you examples. In this slide, I'm showing you the overall themes. The way those grants work is that there is a seed group that pushes the grant and that they keep the funding going. There are examples of networks that have been funded for 20 years, which I think is excellent. For this type of initiatives, there has to be a protocol of effective communication. I think that is fundamental to keep everybody engaged and the grant writing process moving on. It helps, from this type of grants, we can support the scholarship of all the members of the grant, of course, as a result or correlation. I don't know if as a result, but correlation with that happens to build community among this faculty involved in the grant. And something that I have seen in this type of grants, not all of them, but at least the examples that I'm going to show today, in all those examples, there is partnership with one research intensive institution. So let me show you the 3 examples that I have seen of funded networks of faculty at primarily undergraduate institutions. The first example corresponds to the Mercury Consortium. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that network. This is a consortium funded by NSF, NSF MRI. Their grant funds computer nodes, because the science theme of this grant is computer simulation of molecules. So anything that falls within that theme is welcome to that grant. They have partnered with a research intensive institution that houses the cluster, the computer cluster. And then they use part of the indirect money of the grant to host an annual conference. And at this conference, faculty come, network, build collaborations, initiatives for papers and grants and so on. So this Mercury Consortium grant has been around for 20 years. Another example, probably some of you are familiar with this second example, is an NIH IDEA IMBRE grant. The state of Nebraska has that grant, and I was a part of this grant for 8 years. The one constraint of this grant is that the science, because it is for NIH, has to focus on human health. But they have a very nice model of building community. So for example, in Nebraska, we have an annual meeting, book clubs, journal clubs, and then there is this interaction with other faculty. And the last example that I want to give comes from astronomy. I have to admit that I am not super familiar with this third example of a network, but what is interesting is that the model is very similar to the 2 previous examples. So there is funding from NSF. They have a science theme that they are approaching with their scholarship. They have partnered up with one research intensive institution. And they have an annual workshop in which they bring in people together to pretty much network. So those are the 3 examples I wanted to share with everybody. That's all I wanted to share. I guess the message that I want to convey is that I believe in the power of faculty getting self-organized to keep our scholarship moving forward. I don't think money is technically needed for that, but in my 15 years of faculty, I have seen that if a network has money, then the network gets institutional support. So that's all I have to say.
Right. Thanks very much, Patricia. So this is a discussion of a kind of formal network funded by some mechanism, NSF, likely for DBio type folks. And I think there's one of the things that Patricia and I had talked about in this workshop is that people, if anybody else is interested in this kind of thing, to reach out and let us know so we can see if this is something to pursue. You're free to contact me. I'll put my contact info in the chat, or Patricia as well, I believe. There is, of course, other kinds of networks also that don't necessarily have to be so formal and funded. And I don't know what Bruce or Catherine plan to talk about, but Bruce, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. So for me, the kind of network that I've established, that I work with Oren, we have a collaborative NSF grant, but we were collaborating doing research because we wanted to continue doing research at a PUI, where our main job is in fact teaching, and half the time I think administration is actively trying to interfere with my ability to do scientific research rather than supporting it. So it's really a very different kind of situation, and figuring out how to navigate that, especially as new faculty. That's one thing, because I remember when I first started teaching, I was reading Chronicle of Higher Education, and there was someone who just said flat out, you cannot do research at a liberal arts college, can't be done. And I understood, especially over time, what that perspective was. And I feel like that had I not established a network and started working with people at Trinity and San Antonio, the research burden on me to make progress, meaningful progress, would have been too much, because along with Oren, there's a biologist and an applied mathematician that we're all contributing to this, so that we can make research progress and have and those insights and different faculty insights. And so I think that kind of network is really important for someone who wants to continue to do research, because very often what happens, and I think Patricia was implying this, is that when people get tenure, they often just quit. They just it's summertime now, I'm going to take 3 months off, instead of working with the students, which I consider such an important part of the undergraduate educational experience, is to have the opportunity to do scientific research. My students and I are busily preparing for their summer research talk tomorrow. And that process of mentorship and of helping them be, budding scientists get those skills that are going to mostly benefit some PhD advisor, in all cases, the students I'm working with, or some employer in the future. But I love that close mentorship. I like working with the students, but also simultaneously, more than that for me too, is having real science goals, making real scientific progress, and publishing papers. Because I agree with some of the bullet points on the slides, is that my teaching, I think, is intertwined. I don't feel like a scientist qualified to teach a science course if I'm not doing science. I mean, and that's probably not true, but that's how I feel. It's more of an emotional statement than anything, but that for me, it's important to be doing research. And because it does inform me, I'm a better scientist, I'm a better teacher, and vice versa. And teaching has led to scientific insights. And so for me, I think that I would love the idea of a funded formal partnership, but also finding through, and Oren and I knew each other from the University of Texas at Austin, but we were at the March meeting in Boston and realized we were working on projects that could be tied together. He got pulled into a particular study that related to some of the things I was doing, and those networking opportunities, and creating that collaboration without funding, with the goal of eventually submitting an NSF proposal, but it took us, 3 years before we actually did that, Oren? Something like that, of hard work and, all the things that go into scientific research to finally get there. And now that we're funded under NSF, that's a very nice thing. It's nice to get paid a meaningful salary for the work I'm doing in the summer. That's not why I do it, but it's nice to have those things. And so figuring out ways that PUIs could actually identify, and maybe that would be part of the more formal network, that someone in a specific research area, because it's particularly true, I think, in biological physics, that you can be pretty specialized in what you're doing, and finding somebody else out there in a PUI who's interested in that particular problem may be difficult to do unless, you know, you happen to go to a talk at a meeting and things like that, and making sure that we're at those meetings, giving talks and doing all those kinds of networking things that are so important. But for me, I think that's, you know, really what I wanted to share was that, and I agree that it's really important for moving research forward and staying interested in doing the research, because I just don't have anybody in my local institution that does what I do. University of Kentucky isn't too far away, but they don't do this either. That's 35,000. There's just really nobody there doing similar work. And so having collaborators that I can discuss these problems with, it's just critical for my success as a scientist, is to have that kind of feedback and networking opportunities. That's about all I wanted to share.
Great, thanks so much, Bruce. I guess for the sake of time, maybe we can just jump straight to Catherine so that we'll have plenty of time for folks to ask questions or share their views. That would be great.
Sure. And my thoughts, I'll try to be brief. My thoughts, I think, will nicely complement what Patricia and Bruce have shared, because I think my thoughts primarily focus on the curricular benefits of a PUI network. I think that the whole community is thinking more about how to incorporate biological physics into the curriculum in ways that help introduce our exciting field to undergraduates, rather than having it just be something that never really turns up in the curriculum, and they only learn about either through a research experience or by looking at Physics Today or Scientific American or whatever. But I think at PUIs, we have the particular challenge of incorporating it into the curriculum that we have typically a much more limited curriculum than bigger institutions. We have fewer variations of any given intro class. So we often have intro class often has to serve a variety of populations, and then we have way fewer advanced courses. And so I think that there is some commonality across all institutions of how do we just incorporate problems and ideas from biological physics into our sort of traditional, quote, core physics teaching. But then I think there's also the specific challenge for us of how do we bring it into a curriculum where we have very limited numbers of electives, whereas a bigger university may simply say, well, we add an introductory biophysics elective, an intermediate biophysics elective, and an advanced biophysics elective. And our students are used to taking lots and lots of courses in our department rather than being liberal arts students and spread out. And so if students might take 3 physics courses in a semester, which I don't know about you all, but that almost never happens at my PUI. Students are taking, 1 or 2 courses in our department, and then they're taking courses in other departments, which we believe that's what a liberal arts education is about. So I think it would be great for PUI faculty to be able to share ideas of how do we incorporate this into the curriculum. And then along Patricia's important theme of it's really hard to make time and get recognition for things unless there's funding. Several of my colleagues and I were part of launching what's called the Living Physics Portal, which is a system for sharing curricular materials aimed specifically at introductory physics for life science students. That project has been slowed down by the pandemic, but we are working on getting lots of materials in there. And so there's now conversation among those of us who've been involved in that of, is there a way to find funding to expand that portal to also include educational materials for biological physics all across the curriculum? And to the best of my knowledge, thank you for throwing the link in, Patricia. And to the best of my knowledge, those conversations are still at early stages. I had the great gift of a sabbatical this past year. So I helped convene a conversation about this a year ago. And then I was like, bye, everybody, I'm going on sabbatical. And I've not yet caught up with what's happening on that. But I think that, if there are people who are excited about sharing curriculum and resources, I'd love to know who's excited and interested about that. And then when I reconnect to the folks who are working on this, share that. And Joe, who's on this call, might know more about this. And so he can speak up if there has been progress that I'm blissfully unaware of. So that's what I have to share.
Great. Thanks so much, Catherine. So just one thing before we go on, I'm going to post a link in the chat. Last time we did one of these, I started a contact list for biophysics faculty at PUIs, because as far as I can tell, there's no list like that anywhere. So if you're interested, please feel free to put your name and contact information on there. It's not required, obviously, but one of the things that might be cool is if we can all reach out, maybe like meet up at a meeting that we all go to, like the March meeting or something. In any case, feel free to put your information on there if you like. I think, just to sort of frame any conversation, there's sort of multiple dimensions that a network could of things that the network could provide: teaching support for faculty, sharing curricular materials, talking about, teaching life at a PUI, also doing research. I think a lot of us coming from an R1 environment, from graduate school or postdoc, and then suddenly being in an undergraduate environment, it could be useful to have a sort of mentorship type framework where people can contact, like, how do you set up a lab on this budget I've been given? Like, that's not always so simple. So to have people that can be contacted, and then to find collaborators and other various things. So anyway, that's sort of the gist of some of these ideas. Thanks so much to the panelists. And would anybody like to ask questions or give feedback, or what do you all think?
I guess I would say kind of what you are saying is what was the reason I signed up for this, in a way. Like, I'm interested in incorporating more or doing better incorporating biophysics into the classes that I'm teaching. So ideas for that, gaining that from others who have tried things that have worked or haven't worked. Also just having contacts at meetings that are also PUIs is nice, seeing some familiar faces, things like that. It'd be wonderful to find someone who does something very similar to me, but like you said, it's hard to find that. And so that's, to me, a big stretch, but would be very appreciated as well. But yeah, just the, knowing more faces and names and things like that, and having conversations at meetings would be great. So I think everything you're mentioning is wonderful, and kind of having a point, like the network would provide a point of contact for those things, I guess, or a place to go if I do want to look for curricular ideas. Maybe there's a link to the Living Physics portal at a general location, as well as the list of contacts that we're creating now. All of those things could be housed in one location if there was kind of this network housing or links to all of those things, instead of kind of trying to find them individually.
Yeah, so one comment from Patricia is that one of the things that we could try to do is start like some kind of discussion channel on Slack or Basecamp or Discord or something, as a way to just be able to even just post messages, and you could have membership. Let's see, Joe, did you raise your hand?
I did. I was writing it in the chat, but I can say it. With respect to what Christine said, I'm interested in how many of you have found ways to include your biophysics in your traditional courses as examples.
I think I do it as often as I can, either for the pre-med population or for my upper level students. It's kind of easy, and I enjoy that a lot, but it does take time.
And if you wanted it, would there be problems and readings and stuff that you have written that you would be willing to share with other people?
I will need to revise them before I share them.
I mean, part of what I'm pushing is that what Catherine said, I'm one of the Living Physics Portal people, and I would love to see it not just be for the introductory classes, but for ways to have biophysicists give us materials that could be used as examples in advanced courses for physics majors.
Yeah, but actually that's what we do in the biophysicist. I just posted the link on the chat. That's what we are doing in that journal. I don't know how familiar people are with the biophysicist journal. I am editor of that journal. And to be honest, most of the, more than half of the submissions target upper level courses. So the tools that are presented, the themes that are presented are tools that, for example, I have used in my computational physics course, I have used in my thermodynamics course. So there's that type of curricular material.
Just to add to this conversation, because I think that one of the goals of the Living Physics portal is to allow submission of much more small scale curricular materials as than you would report in an article, so to be able to say, here's just a set of homework problems that I assign, without it being rising to the level of being in a position to write a whole article about it. Because I think that there's often a barrier to so like, just to give a concrete example, I know that it took me much longer to write an article, in my case for the American Journal of Physics, about teaching the electrocardiogram in introductory physics for life sciences. It took me way longer to finally write that article and submit it and go through that whole process than to develop the curricular materials. And I think the hope is that the portal can lower the barrier to sharing of materials. But I completely agree with you, Patricia, that having materials accompanied by an article can offer a really rich window into, like, how do we use these materials and where do they fit into the curriculum and so on. And so I think there's a place for both. And the hope of the portal is to lower the barrier to both contribute, but also to adapt materials that have been contributed by somebody else, that another person can say, oh, I tried this in my class and I had to change it in this way to make it work for my students. And here's my modified version. And that, again, needs a lower threshold than writing an article, I think. So I think there's really a place for both.
I would also like to point out that the Living Physics portal has a venue for working groups to work within the portal, sharing discussions for developing materials that they're working on. So if you have some ideas and you want to get and you can find 3 or 4 other people who want to work with you on that is a place where you can do it and get some support.
Patricia, how would you describe the kind of flow of materials through the biophysicist from your editor perspective? Like, are you out soliciting submissions? Are they coming in at the rate such that you get as many as you want for the number of issues that you publish? Like, how would you describe that? Like, should one goal of a network might be just to like bring more material through?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is true that I think that the journal was launched in summer 2020, right? So timing has been quite interesting. So we have slightly less submissions that we want, but here is the plus side. Through the journal, we are building a community of biophysics educators through the Biophysical Society. So in that community, we are including chemists, biologists, engineers, so anybody who identify themselves as a biophysicist, but coming from different academic pathways. Some articles do have supplementary information. So in structures, like I have done it, I downloaded the example of the Fourier transform, right? So I download them, I copy paste into my slides. So there is, I guess, to answer your question specifically, there is a way in which instructors can adapt the articles, the content of the articles. But as any tool, there is always something to tweak. But I would probably, I don't know how people feel about, but I would like to ask a completely different question, which is a little bit related to a potential network, funded network, which is an idea we discussed with Aurin last time, which is the concept of having course undergraduate research experiences in biological physics, which is a theme that is actually relatively common in biology and chemistry because of the nature of the science. In physics, I don't think it is yet as common, but I think if we get clever, we can establish course undergraduate research experiences. And I'm going to give you an example, okay, which is not my idea, it's more like what I have learned interacting from others, right? I am a computational person, I do protein folding, right? But if I get data from any of you who don't do protein folding, right? And I have my students analyzing the data, that's a type of research, right? And that could be an interesting theme that we could use to bind the network. And likewise, I would be happy to share all my files with RMSD and radius of gyration and order parameters, and your students can build something with that data. That was something that we talked about, and I would be curious to see what people think about that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it goes back to the limitations of the variety of courses that we offer. And I was puzzling as we were talking, thinking about, I've taken over teaching modern physics sequence, and that has a traditional set of labs that are taught. I remember finding it cool to try to measure the speed of light, but we are pretty sure we know what that is. But figuring out ways, I don't know that in that context, but associated with that is an advanced, experimental techniques that I'm gonna teach. And in that context, that could include that kind of cure, I think is the acronym, right? That undergraduate research, course-based undergraduate research, I think is what that stands for. So that the students are getting a meaningful research experience without it having to fall on me. I've been the primary driver of research opportunities at my institution. Now I have two new colleagues who are also mentoring students during the summer, so that helps a lot. But to be able to do that in the course would be really nice, in figuring out ways that to allow the students enough space to do some of the design, to follow the ideas they want to follow. I mean, I think that's just that natural curiosity is important, as opposed to here's this lab, you go do it, and they may or may not figure out how to do it, or they Google an answer of some sort, but something that they buy into, that's their project that they want to do, and figure out ideas for that would be great, I think, because we also have an optics course, which certainly can involve trying to design a trap or something like that. Could be a great project that would be real. Those are real research skills. So I'm sort of just speaking off the cuff and thinking out loud about ways that we could possibly do that, because I do like the idea, and I do, to Joe's question, try to find ways to include biologically related problems. I've taken over Physics for Life Sciences, which is second semester algebra-based course, and want to increase the number of problems that are in that, and in that course. And Catherine, to your point, that lower barrier is something I need. I'm not prepared to write a journal article about it, but now that I know about this portal, I didn't know about it before this meeting, I can both get resources and contribute resources as I'm developing them over time. But at the higher level courses, what I'm struggling with is figuring out ways it would fit into our traditional sort of limited set of advanced courses, an advanced mechanics course. But torque, Oren and I are studying torque on a bacterial motor, torque speed curves, things like that. So there are definitely ways I could come up with to include stuff there. But it takes some creativity, but I like that. So yeah.
Well, and one thing I think is valuable about a network is that some of the way you incorporate biological physics into these standard courses is by making those creative connections. And some of the way you can is by saying, we don't have to keep these courses exactly the same as they've always been. Maybe we can replace some of what's in Marion and Thornton or whatever, mechanics we use with instead some fluid physics that often just never shows up in the curriculum at PUIs because there's nowhere to put it, and we have a more limited number of courses. And so I think that's where having the courage to do something like that, by knowing that there are other people at similar institutions who don't think it's a crazy idea, can be helpful, because when we have so much more in the way of constraints on our curriculum, it can be helpful to have conversation partners. And with regard to Patricia's comment about the idea of a cure, I'm curious, do you anticipate that such a cure could be led by someone who didn't have your expertise?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's why we talk about network, right?
So are you offering that you would help lead a cure for students at other institutions?
I mean, the idea is that I think each of us has their own expertise. And I think that the goal of a network is to build this type of interrelations that support each other. So for example, and to answer your question and to make a comment to your comment, right? I can make my short video that explains my simulations, the science question, then I share the video with the 9 of you, and then you share the video with your students, right? And then you show the data and do, I don't know, free energy of the data, right? Free energy calculation. And then the same for you, like you have your experiment, your setup, your science. You make a video for me because I believe I cannot explain it as good as you could. And then I project the video to my students. You give me your data if you feel comfortable sharing your data, right? But that's the concept of a network, a collaborative network. And I can say, look, this is how the raw data looks like. This is how you could process, So I don't know, I guess because there are different ways in which we could, as a network, enhance teaching and scholarship. And if there is money, it'll be better.
Just to jump in, and maybe, I don't know where this fits in the conversation, but I do partly have a question, and then I guess something to say is that, I guess my question is the Living Physics portal is like a place that people can put and get curricular stuff. Does it also function as a place that you can contact people? Does it work in that way, and is it commonly used in that way, I guess is my question.
It is designed to work that way. I think that the timing of the pandemic has sort of impaired progress on many things. And I think, one of the original intents had been to do a lot with recruiting, with the sort of, once the infrastructure was built, I think the intent was to do a lot in recruiting and reaching out to prospective participants. And that has been slowed down, both because people are busy, because even the original team that built the system and had the materials to put in to be the kind of core starting material to seed it, to make it a useful thing that people wanted to go to because they could find stuff. We've all been putting in our materials more slowly than, in some non-pandemic universe we would have. So I think that there are not that many people currently using it that way, but it has that functionality. And I think that if there was a pre-existing network, and Joe may know more about this than I do, that, if there was a network that would sort of say, we'd like to use it in this way, I think the functionality is there to use it. Joe, is that correct?
It is. And let me, if I can share my screen for a moment, I can show the portal and show you.
You should be able to share.
Yes,
I believe.
okay, there, I'm going to share that. This is the Living Physics portal. I'm already logged in, but it says, find materials, contribute materials, and participate in our supportive community. And there are events and working groups. Since the pandemic, there have been no new working groups, but this is the sort of thing, the working groups that there were. Curriculum swap, for example, people sharing materials they were working with, and developing materials. But for example, there was a thing on fluids. Where was that? Oh, by the way, there are two libraries in the portal. One, you can just put your stuff. It's called the community library. The second, you have to document a little more, and it goes through an editorial review, and that's called the vetted library. And when it's accepted for the vetted library, it gets a DOI. You can put it on your curriculum vitae as a publication of educational materials. Where was that fluids group? Showcasing curriculum about fluids. So sharing materials about fluids. There were 7 people involved, and they would, every couple of weeks, they would discuss things. And it's supposed to be that in 3 months, you're supposed to finish something and put it up on the portal. But it was also just useful for networking and for people sharing what they had done to discuss for particular courses.
Yeah, I have to say that I was a member of 2 of those groups. Very useful. very, very useful. And sorry, coming back to the same point, right? The postdoc who was paid by a grant, hint, hint, we need a grant. She was the person that kept the group going. And I have to say, it was a very, very useful group. They helped me a lot. Back then I was developing, I'm pretty sure people know IO Labs. I was developing the handouts for my IO Labs, so they helped me a lot with that. So the model works very well. The person that hosted each group was paid.
Yeah, we unfortunately don't currently have enough money to support such a person. We are working on getting revenue streams. And we have some, but not enough for that yet.
But I
If
think
you had
the
a grant,
organ,
if you went for a grant for your PUI folks, you could put have a postdoc to be working with the networking, and one of their jobs could be to be working with the portal.
or just to Oren's point, the functionality is there such that it could be a home base for, you know, a variety of different kinds of activities and working groups, and the network could potentially just have, you know, its own person who is its facilitator, and there would be some, you know, presumably some kind of usage fee could be worked out as part of just maintaining the infrastructure. But I think all these different kinds of models of, exactly as Patricia said, you need somebody who has the funded time to keep these kinds of activities going. The portal's infrastructure could intersect with these kinds of activities in a variety of supportive ways. And I would say that my picture is that we're still trying to kind of recover from the challenges of the pandemic in broadening the community, and still trying to figure out what the next steps are. And so if a group said, we want to do this, and here's how we would like the portal to be able to support us, can it do that right now? Could it, you know, could it do that in the future? I think if there was a specified, here's how we would like a group to function, and here's the functionality we would need to support it, you know, I think that would be a conversation that the folks who are leading the portal would be thrilled to have, because we built the back end of it to be very flexible, to be very much about supporting groups, and there's plenty of possibility for adapting and specializing to meet needs. But there might also be projects that a PUI group would want to do that are purely research related. You know, I don't want to keep us sticking to the portal, and potentially the portal functionality backend could serve to support those as well, if you know, if it seemed to be the best place. I don't know that the portal is designed in a manner that is optimal for supporting a research collaboration as opposed to curriculum focused things. But, you know, I think this, you know, any idea that people had for, you know, could we have some kind of a platform to support our collaborative work, you know, please feel free to ask about that. And if it doesn't fit what the platform can do, you know, we'll say no. But I loved Bruce's point that kind of research with students is actually, it's a part of our curricular work, right? It's part of their education as students. And so
yeah, that's why the funded network supports scholarship. And the funded network, because we have the money, we can bring people together physically in one space. And from those interactions, I've seen papers emerge, grants emerge. Somebody that I met in this network, we submitted our letter of intent last Friday. We are working on a paper with other persons. So I think this type of networks really, really sustain our scholarship And at this when we have these conferences that happen once per year, we always talk about teaching, right? Because like we talk about teaching because otherwise we wouldn't be at the type of institutions that we are, right? Like we love teaching, but we talk about that. So there is always this enrichment and getting new ideas and stealing material, not through the Living Physics Portal Gathering, from other people, right? So that happens when we bring people together. Yeah.
I think, so just to be mindful of folks' time, I think we should probably wrap up. But I just wanted to make maybe a couple of closing comments. One is that the Living Physics Portal sounds like a pretty cool project, and its versatility for collecting materials, being able to distribute them, ways for people to meet. And I guess one of the things I would want to try to emphasize that a network has to have.
Oren, you are muted.
Oh no, sorry everybody. Let me say what I was saying to myself. Just to wrap up, I think one of the important points is that for a network to be useful, it needs to have a certain kind of stability. And so it seems like the Living Physics Portal, for example, is a stable structure which has an administration and can be used for curricular stuff. And like Patricia has emphasized, having funding for a network also allows a certain kind of stability. So I think, I don't know, maybe just as a closing thought, as a group of people, biophysics faculty at PUIs, you know, how can we going forward as a community try to like maintain these stable structures that will enable us to interact on all of these various levels? I personally plan to stay on the community engagement committee, and if anybody has any ideas about future events that they think would be good or useful, please feel free to let me know. I would be very happy to try to organize them. And then also that contact list, which everybody has a link to, you know, it might be possible for us, a group of us, to gather at the March meeting or wherever people go to talk about these sorts of things more. So with that, I guess we'll wrap up. Thank you so much to Patricia, Bruce, and Catherine, and to those of you who came to participate. It's great to meet you.
Thanks for organizing us, Oren.
Yeah. Thanks, Oren. Yeah, the physics portal is going to be great. I needed that. But yeah, wonderful to meet you all. Hopefully we'll see you at March meeting. I'll be there unless they do it in Vegas again, and then I'm not going. I refuse. Anyway.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.